apply this gain filter just so that I can work with the data. When you have a very faint response in some of the data, or depending on what machine you're using, it's important to look at the data in radargram first, just so you can begin. You don't want to go into 3D processing and do any of these crazy filters before you understand what the data looks like in its raw form in 2D. I'm going to go do a very quick gain filter here. And then after this, the next thing that I'll end up probably going through to do is a time zero correction to remove this kind of blank spot at the top of the radargram. And so I'm kind of selecting radargrams further down in the survey. So we see we're on kind of 30 right now. And the reason for that is because some of the very first transects are very short. They're like, maybe a meter in length. And those squish and get pulled. So it's easier when you kind of get down to some of these longer transects to better understand the data. So I'm going to exit out of here, and I'm going to come up to radargram editing here to go ahead and remove that time zero correction. So the important thing here is I'm going to correct from the regain just so I can see it a little bit. Threshold at about 0.2. And then I'm just going to do an auto line by line quickly to get that time zero automatically corrected and pulled up. And then once this is done, we can go back to the filter menu. We can pull open a radargram again. We can begin working through what changes, if any, we need to make in the data before we begin to move into time slicing, before we begin to shift into any type of 3D visualization.
And I'm not sure if we've talked about this before, but those methods 1, method 2, method 3, for the folks who hadn't maybe seen the last one, is why do you choose whichever one you choose, right? So you're choosing method 1, and we've had this discussion numerous times, but why do you typically go with 1 for those that haven't kind of dealt with that? We've obviously had a lot of people in our training program had lots of different opinion. Why do you decide to choose 1?
I choose 1 because I like preserving as much data as possible. I like seeing it from kind of the as raw as you can get. I want to see it as raw as I can get because I can interpret and I can make decisions based on the maximum amount of data. There are arguments for both 2 and 3, and I don't think. I mean, you said that last time we had this conversation that somebody made a really good argument for number 3. And so I think it's kind of, we were both raised in kind of the same academic, same geophysical background.
Sure.
And so I think we both kind of have that similar mindset with it. Especially coming from
that guy, made a case for 3. It was definitely interesting. I mean, I'd never thought about it in those terms where that 0, there's no debate as to where it crosses 0. All right. Well, one other question, because we usually do line by line, and certainly when we run the blue box here, we do line by line. When would somebody want to use a scan by scan? What's the benefit? And then what's the drawback?
I mean, so line by line is going to go, hold on, let me do it. So scan by scan is going to go individual trace by individual trace, right? Versus line by line where it's going kind of radar
entire profile by profile.
Yeah. So you can get instances where the top kind of your radargram kind of does this, depending on if you're doing scan by scan. I mean, I guess it's a similar argument to some of the background filter issues with kind of removing linear responses and ensuring that you're kind of consistent with your application of changes. I've always used line by line. Have you used
it's far faster? So line by line is obviously far faster. Scan by scan, well, for a project this size, right, it's going to be much slower. However, I mean, I have found that scan by scan can be helpful when you have, the ground coupling effect is going to change what your 0 time ends up being, right? And so how much that antenna actually gets extracted, that signal gets extracted into the ground. You might be on a site, where I've seen it, where your lines cut across numerous different types of surface conditions.
Mhm.
We have variation in how wet the soil is. Some areas you might actually have soil, and some you might have grass, and actually you might have asphalt in another area. Or so where there's a lot of inconsistency, going line by line may not actually pull everything up to the same zero
Mhm.
correctly.
Well, we had that
And so-
situation here.
Mm.
This site had at the very top.
Mhm.
And so this
Yeah,
might be a good
across
example,
it.
right?
Yep.
Because this one
Yeah,
had,
yeah.
we went across grass, we went across
Mhm.
bare dirt in this grid, and we went across concrete,
Yeah.
right? And so even here, if we kind of step
Yeah.
through this, you
But
can
it
see
does seem like it did a decent job, right?
Yeah.
It's not like that dramatic. So even going
No.
line by line, but that's when I've seen it, right? That's when I've
Okay.
seen scan by scan be really useful, when you have to have that like ultra high exactness, of zero, because you have kind of hyper variability within there, and each scan then gets read at a different zero time. Then you want to make sure that it's corrected scan by scan. But again, there's always a trade-off, right? And so good enough might just be good enough. If you're talking fractions of an inch, that might be acceptable, and still go line by line and cut it off and have but that's kind of the point.
You can also adjust the threshold too, and that's going to adjust whether or not how kind of specific it is in finding those zeros and adjusting up and down.
Mhm.
So
Right.
maybe
Like a percentage of where you're calling zero.
Yeah, and so if like maybe instead of like if you need to be a little bit more exact, you can adjust threshold first before committing to a really long, a kind of a longer scan by scan.
Yeah, that's a good point
as well. Okay, so I think the next thing we're going to do is come back into the filter menu just to do a quick preview again. I'm going to select the edit folder here because we just did a time zero correction on this. So pop this open. I'm going to also, this is a very short transect, so I'm gonna come down to a longer one so we can better visualize it here. I mean, if I wanted to better like visualize that first, this is actually a good point. You can see how stretched out this is. So I can just change my X pixels maybe, and maybe so I change it to 200, maybe even 100, because this is a very, very short transect. Like this is like a 30 or 40 centimeter transect. And so you can see here kind of the data getting back to what we would expect from a
kind of normalcy.
Yeah, and so this is really important. If you ever like some of the very first times I pulled GPR Slice open and started looking at my shorter transects, it looked like this. Like it looked spread out. And I was like, oh God, did I collect it in, what did I mess up? Or what did I do incorrectly? And no, it's just the visualization of the data. So it's a kind of an important thing to check.
And this is true for other programs too. I mean, where it doesn't always project your profile exact, because you may have variety of profile lengths. And so some allow you to kind of even just take the bottom corner and adjust it, the scale of it, like Echo Project or something like that, where you can literally just kind of pull it around and resize it to your liking, right before you kind of output a JPEG or whatever, start your process. Which is a nice feature too.
Yeah.
But there's obviously some noise in here.
Yes, there's very clear both horizontal and vertical, right? Like you're seeing some of this fuzziness.
This is a great example, right? Where there's a something at about 228 centimeters, below ground there, and and it's got some pixelation coming across it, and it's got some horizontal banding coming across it. Yep, right there.
Yeah, right here.
And so, that's a perfect example where you can still see it, but can we potentially get a little bit better clarity to that response than what we have?
Yeah, so let's go ahead and try to do that. So let's pop in a quick background filter here, and we'll run it and see how it does. That was transect 118. So we'll run this filter. We can come back to 118 and kind of keep looking at that response and see kind of how it adjusts, and see what some of these filtering processes can do to help you with your data interpretation, whether it's utility, whether it's structural, whether it's archaeological, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and so again, now you're doing the length, the auto set, right, which is 99,000. And so what that means is that's the number, that's the window, right? So that's the number of traces that it's going to use in the filter. So the reason it auto sets to 99,000, everybody out there who may not have known this, is it's basically telling you that it's going to do a full window of your entire profile, right? So it's a non-aggressive background filter. Background filter is one of the filters that could remove stuff you're interested in differentially more than anything else. And so the auto set is this non-aggressive background filter where if you wanted to adjust it, then you could go in, undo auto set, and adjust that length. And so, for example, here, my assumption is we probably had like 50 scans per meter or something. Like let's say we had 50 scans a meter. That would mean that every 2 centimeters we're taking a trace. And so, if instead of 99,000 in there we put 50, that would mean that our background filter window would be 1 meter, because it's 50 scans times 2 centimeters apart. It's anything larger than a meter is going to be taken out. Too aggressive for what we're looking for. You need to remove, horizontal basins or something like that. And in this case, it was a historic structure, and that may be totally horizontal. And actually, they were right in some of the.
Or you remove a utility if you're
writing on top of it. Yep. Yeah. Or even if you're not writing exactly on top of it, but like you're crossing it at long distances, long oblong angles, it could just make that choppy. And so it's just not as clean as you're plotting it. So that's why we generally recommend that if you use background, you go with a non-aggressive filter first before you start making it more and more aggressive. And in this case, I think you mentioned in the last live stream we did for the data processing, you basically always keep it non-aggressive because it kind of does the job for you, and every filter you do removes something, whether it's background, bandpass, deconvolution, any step you take it through, you're removing something. And so you always got to keep that, in mind.
Yeah. And there's very little, there are very few things while we're working through that I'm like, oh, I want to remove, there are very, I don't know if I can think of an instance where I'm like, I really want to remove these horizontal, things that are shorter. Maybe in a specific location, if you're like, oh, I want to specifically remove that thing, and you can go and count it. But like realistically, there's no reason to it in my mind. And we had a question in chat asking what software we're using. This is GPR Slice is what we're using right now to work.
And just to let it be known, right? So we are we sell and support GPR Slice, and if anybody who is watching is interested in a demo, just feel free to reach out to us at bigmangeo.com, and we're happy to set up a time to do a free demo with you, or just pop it into the chat, your email address, and we'll go ahead and reach out to you.
Absolutely.
And so GPR Slice, by the way, because if they don't know what it is and they may not know, it's a third-party software that you can, if you just pop back in and show them the list of GPR that can be processed here. So because it's third party, all of these. So it had MALA, IDS, GSSI, US Radar, 3D Radar, any SegWi, Radar Team, ProSec, UTSI, Geoscan. I mean, all of those can be processed in here. Impulse Radar. So if you have a new one, LOSA, if you're going deep, Pulse Echoes and Noggins from software.
Impulse, the Raptors, and
Impulse, the Raptor. Yep. And now you even have Pundit, which is an ultrasonics unit, and then UTEX, which is a microwave. And I would say thank you, Chris Nelson, for calling up Dean and having him input that, because it's always nice to have, it's like Chris, like you and I always say, or you say to me, is kind of waves are waves, and it should be able to be used to do more than that. As a matter of fact, GPR Slice can actually be used to process other geophysics data. So do you know where that is? That should be in
yes, it's in import. It's in grid. Yep.
And so import if you just go, it says here import 2D geophysics data or 3D, and we've seen examples where folks have done downhole susceptibility in here, magnetometry in here. So it can do all that stuff. It's not built for that, but it does. It's so versatile, it allows you to do it. But we generally just use it for GPR. But the reason we do is that we have 4 or 5 different GPR units from different manufacturers, and it's a great third-party piece that allows us to do that. And it's also obviously really powerful. So, but thank you for asking what software it was. If we didn't mention that, I apologize.
Okay, so we're going to pop back to transect 118. This is where we were at before, where we kind of highlighted this response right here. And you can already see just the background filter that we removed, that horizontal filter, remove any of the horizontal banding we have. It did a really great job at the top for any of the antenna noise originally. You can very clearly see kind of the beginning of the concrete and the end of the concrete at the very top over some of these areas, because there was very clear pathways that we kind of walking paths that we went over in a couple of these areas. And you can also see at the bottom here, as we look through this data, this response, the good kind of a good portion of the left half of it was completely cut off in the original unprocessed, unfiltered data. So that background filter does kind of a really good job of clarifying some of the data up. And you can also see that it didn't remove any of our kind of horizons we see here. So like this long linear response here was not removed with the background filter. And that's the advantage of ensuring or using such a large number, that auto set on the background filter, is you're able to remove this noise at the top, this antenna noise, but you don't remove any of these really important soil layers, any of these kind of concrete to soil interfaces. So this is a really good example, this transect as well, of kind of keeping in linear responses, but removing noise in the data. So I think the next thing we do is a bandpass. And that bandpass is a vertical filter, so it's going to remove some of this fuzziness here. Okay. So I'll hop out of this menu and come down into the spectra plus gain menu here and pull open, and we'll pull it back open 118 again, just so we have it, so we can look at the same transect. And I'm going to just hit help set. What this is going to do is it's going to automatically detect the cutoff points for your high and low frequencies on your bandpass for your filter. And so what a bandpass is going to do is it's going to come in and it's going to, based on what you set here, it's going to clip data on either end, on the low end and the high end, to ensure that you don't get any of this kind of vertical streaking. And as if you look at the top here, this kind of red squiggly line is kind of our frequency distribution, right? And so as we move across from like either right to left or left to right of the data and move over responses here, you can see the kind of responses of the data changing, and we can get a better understanding of what is potential noise and what is potential not noise as we begin to look at this stuff. So if we hover over this really large response here, we can see kind of some responses near the 115 or kind of maybe the 120, 130 range that are peaking up. Not as much higher frequency stuff. Maybe there's some stuff maybe around 500 that's coming in, right? And so we can just kind of move through and look at some and kind of come a little bit further down, right? And look at some of this fuzzy down here and see potentially where some of that noise is, right? And so you look at kind of the left green bar here at just over the 4, the 114 on the distribution, and we can see that spike, right? At like, I don't know.
Yeah, can we, let me see if I can, oh, I can't because, oh yeah.
What's up?
Rotate. Oh, so this will be interesting. Let's see if this works. Right, so this spike right here, is that showing up?
Oh yeah, it did show up. Nice. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, so that spike right there, seems to be outside of the range of the system.
Yep.
Of what we're expecting, and that could be that fuzziness right there. Now it's not so overbearing, so we kind of still get something in there.
Yeah.
But it's obviously unwanted.
Yep.
And it shows right that you could bring those green lines a little bit tighter, at least from the.
Yep. So if I come in like here,
part of the spectrum.
There we go.
And kind of remove some of those other lower spikes in there.
There we go. So like we can see there, right? Just that shift of that green bar, we can cut a lot of that off.
Yeah. Why don't you show them, like, well, let's see what it looks like if you put the bars all the way out. So this doesn't have a ton of noise.
So like here and here.
Some, yeah. And now if you go help set on it, right, you can see that stuff now in the bottom, all that fuzz.
Yeah, here.
Everyone's who's watching, and so that's what it's doing. So now help set it with the appropriate levels.
I'll do it like here, and maybe like here.
Right, boom.
Yep.
And so you can just, it's nice to see that comparison. Just one,
almost like move it a little bit more, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like that's really like that's
yeah. There great. You go. See that pulled you just right outside that noise, and so so now. Right, that one feature that we were looking at
looks great.
Yeah, it's starting to look really good, and it definitely has a bit more clarity than it did, prior to doing these filters, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you see a little bit of responses down here, but this is probably signal attenuation rather than the noise, right? All these kind of little hitches, right? And so I think
could be, yeah.
I think we're good overall with this selection.
And they may even have been like, like trace jumps, where you get a blank. If the system got pushed a little too fast at 1 second, it could have just been. And it was wet out there that day, if I remember correctly. So I'm super impressed with the quality. Well, again, we had quite a bit of noise and some background and whatever, but
Mhm.
be able to see something that clean. It's obviously probably got a pretty big difference between whatever that is and
Mhm.
whatever it's embedded in.
Yep.
It's still showing up pretty decently.
Okay, so I think I'm happy with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and do it. I'm gonna go ahead and cut that off. So I'll run the bandpass quickly. We'll cut that data. We'll pull it back up. We'll see what it looks like, and see if we're kind of happy with what the data looks like. But that's kind of the benefit of kind of working manually through some of this data. You're able to you're able to apply a filter, you're able to adjust the data a little bit, you're able to see it. And then if you want to back off of it, you can. If you want to go back to raw and start over, you can. So there is some benefit to working through a data set manually, especially one that you've already processed and potentially submitted to a client. Just going back and seeing what did you do, what decisions did you make originally, and being able to adjust, like, and say, okay, well, that original processing, we probably didn't cut enough out of the bandpass. So going forward, let's spend a little bit more time with the bandpass filter, or let's, yada, yada. So let's go down to 118 again here. Oh, it looks great. It looks pretty good here. And we can see here this response that we originally had down here. You can see most of the response here. It's pretty strong reflection that far down, right? And so I think